They used to say Earth could never be silenced, that it would always roar, through its storms, its oceans, its people. But now, only the silence remains. The kind of silence that hums in your bones when you're too far from home. The kind that grows louder the more you try to ignore it. The ship creaked again. Not from damage, not from wear, but from something deeper. Something alive. Or maybe that was just the imagination getting loud again. He stood at the edge of the observation deck, staring out into the void. The stars looked no different now than they did when Earth was still green, still spinning, still full of life. But out here, even starlight feels hollow. He didn't blink as the blue shimmer of a nebula passed far below them. It reminded him of Earth's oceans, before they boiled. No one talks about the last day. Not out loud. But it was always there, hiding in the silence of each room, breathing down the back of every conversation. The memories were like ghosts, unseen, but impossible to ignore. She walked in quietly, footsteps almost weightless on the titanium floor. "We've got a signal," she said, voice low, almost afraid of being heard. He turned, brows furrowing. "Where?" "From the Perseus corridor. 3 bursts. Same frequency as Earth's last deep space beacon," he finished for her. Neither of them spoke after that. The signal shouldn't exist. The last known transmission from Earth was 68 years ago, before the core fractures started. Before the firestorms. Before the noise stopped. They'd been drifting along the edge of the Sol graveyard, scavenging old satellites and forgotten probes for anything they could use. Batteries, coils, stable code, even metal scraps. The graveyard stretched for thousands of kilometers, full of the skeletons of machines that once orbited a living planet. Now Earth was just shadow. A glowing crust of radiation and smoke. But that signal. It shouldn't have been possible. The crew gathered in the central hold. Not because of orders. No one gave orders anymore. But because of instinct. It had been years since any of them had heard anything from Earth. Most had accepted it was gone. Some had never even seen it. But a signal? That was something different. There were only 6 of them left on the Osiris. Originally designed for 100. The corridors that once buzzed with life now echoed with the emptiness of too many unspoken words. The ship didn't feel like a vessel anymore. It felt like a tomb that kept moving. The engineer rubbed his eyes with grease-stained hands. "You sure it's not just echo data? Ghost signals bounce all the time near the belt." "It's clean," she replied. "Sharp and deliberate." It repeated itself 3 times. "What did it say?" the pilot asked from the shadows. Her voice lowered. "Just 2 words." Everyone leaned in. She hesitated, as if speaking them out loud would make them real. "Come home." The silence that followed was colder than the dark outside the hull. "No one's there," the engineer muttered. "This has to be some leftover beacon code." The pilot shook his head. "Code doesn't send a message like that. Not after 6 decades. And not in our language." They all knew what it meant, even if no one said it. Something, someone, was calling them back. Or pretending to. He stood again, voice steady but heavy. "Plot a return vector. We'll get as close as we can without dipping into the burn zone." "No," the medic said, almost too fast. "We don't go back. You saw what happened to the Halcyon. Radiation cooked them through before they even hit orbit." "She's right," the engineer added. "One leak in the shielding and we're fried." He looked at all of them, eyes sharp. "Then we'll keep our distance." "But we're not ignoring this." "What if it's a trap?" the pilot asked. He met the question with silence. He didn't know. None of them did. But what choice did they have? The universe was big. Too big. And too quiet. Something about that signal cut through the silence like a blade. And for people who'd lost everything, even a blade felt like a reason to move. They changed course that same day. The engines fired up, rumbling like thunder across the hollow ship. The stars tilted slightly, and for the first time in months, they were headed home. They passed the orbit of Mars 3 days later. The red planet had been colonized once, before the storms. Before Earth's fall shook the entire system like a dying animal. Mars had gone dark 10 years after Earth. No one talked about that either. On day 5, the ship picked up another signal. This time, it wasn't a message, it was a map. A narrow corridor through the radiation belt. One small opening. Just wide enough for them. The AI confirmed it twice, but the results didn't make sense. That path shouldn't exist, she said. The math says it should have collapsed years ago. Then something's keeping it open, the pilot whispered. They passed the first debris field shortly after. Old satellites, burned hulls, fractured solar panels, all floating in eerie stillness. They looked like frozen bones in space. A few still bore markings, the UN crest, private corp logos, even a few military tags. The Osiris passed silently between them, engines humming low. They didn't speak much during those days. Not because of tension, but because words felt too small for what they were heading into. Every system beep, every flicker of the lights, felt like a warning. Like the ship itself didn't want to go back. By day 9, Earth came into view. But it didn't look like the last photos. It was brighter. Not with life, but with fire. The clouds were gone, peeled away like flesh. The oceans had evaporated or turned to steam. What remained was a crust of molten rock, cracks glowing red across the surface. But something moved near the equator, something massive. He zoomed the display in. A structure. No, not a structure. A machine. A tower of metal rising out of the scorched earth, pulsing with blue light. Orbiting it were dozens of small satellites, except they weren't transmitting anything. They were watching. I don't like this, the medic said. That thing wasn't there before. That's new. New, the engineer repeated. How? Nothing grows on fire. It's not growing, he murmured. It was built. By who? Someone asked. They didn't have an answer. Then came the sound. Not through speakers. Not through sensors. But through the walls. A low, deep hum. Rhythmic. Like a heartbeat. The ship trembled slightly. The lights flickered. And then, in every crew member's earpiece, another message. One word, spoken in perfect, human English. Closer. It wasn't a suggestion. The Osiris began to drift forward, on its own. He slammed the manual override, but the controls locked. Engines not responding, the pilot shouted. We're being pulled in. We're still outside the burn radius, the engineer yelled. Whatever this is, it's not gravity. Then the tower pulsed. A beam of light shot out from its core, piercing the blackness. It didn't strike them. It scanned them. They all froze as the data poured in. The ship's sensors went haywire. Screens flashed symbols no one recognized. A language. A warning. The medic screamed as her arm glowed for a second, faint, blue veins lighting up beneath her skin. Then it stopped. Are you okay? He rushed to her side. I don't know, she breathed, staring at her arm. I felt something. Like something was looking through me. The tower pulsed again. Another message came through, this time not in words, but in images. A glimpse of Earth, before it burned. A forest. Children laughing. Rain. Then silence again. What the hell is this thing? The pilot asked, hands shaking. It remembers us, she whispered. They were only 20,000 kilometers from the tower now. Too close. Get us out, he ordered. Now. Trying, the engineer muttered, punching at the console. Something's rewriting our NAV systems, faster than I can block it. Another pulse. And this time, it wasn't just sound or light. It was emotion. He staggered back as a wave of sorrow flooded through him, real, raw, ancient. Not his own, but deeper. Larger. The grief of a world that lost everything. The ache of something that had waited too long in the dark. It's alive, the pilot gasped. No, he said, his voice cracking. It's not just alive. It's Earth. They all stared at him. What? That tower. That thing. It's not a machine. It's what's left of the planet, what it became after we left. After everything burned. They looked back at the glowing surface, at the tower, at the orbiting machines. I think I think it's been trying to reach us for years. The medic stared at her arm again. The blue glow had faded, but she still felt it. A presence. Watching. Waiting. "But why now?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Because suddenly, the lights dimmed completely. The ship stopped moving. No sound. No signal. Only the dark. And then, just before total silence, a human voice. From the speakers. Crying. Begging. "I waited for you." And the airlock began to open on its own. The silence inside the ship had changed. It wasn't just quiet now, it was expectant. Like the hull itself was holding its breath, listening. The corridor lights dimmed slightly as the engines shifted into lower power mode. They weren't drifting, but they were coasting now. Trying to stay quiet. Invisible. Whatever had happened to Earth, whatever had torn apart communication lines and swallowed entire cities in static, it was still out there. Somewhere. No one said it, not aloud, but they were all thinking the same thing. What if it followed them? He leaned over the console again, fingers hovering just above the glowing controls. The ship sensors were still scanning, quietly, methodically. Nothing showed up. No ships. No transmissions. Not even debris from Earth's defense satellites. Just void. That was wrong. That was impossible. There should have been something. Behind him, the rest of the crew was scattered across the command deck, but no one had sat down since the transmission. They paced. They murmured. They stared out the viewing panels like they'd see something crawling out of the dark. "You think we made it out too soon?" one of them whispered. "No such thing as too soon," someone else muttered. "We saw what happened." Another voice. "We didn't see anything. We just heard the screams." They fell silent again. He finally turned around and faced them. Not the crew. His crew. The last crew Earth might have. They weren't soldiers, not really. Scientists. Engineers. 2 doctors. 1 pilot. And him, just a systems tech who happened to be on the shift when the alarm started. But when the orbital grid failed, and Earth's surface went quiet, someone had to get them off the planet. So they ran. Not like cowards. Like survivors. Because that's what humans were best at. He looked to the woman standing nearest to the observation panel. She hadn't blinked in a while. Her arms were folded tightly, fists clenched under her elbows. She was the one who had decoded the last burst from Earth before it went dark. She didn't move when she spoke. "I don't think it was natural." "What do you mean?" someone asked from the back. "I mean the frequency of the burst. It wasn't just data compression. It was too clean. Structured. Almost like—" She turned, finally, her face pale and drawn. "Like something was shaping it. Guiding it." "You're saying it was intelligent?" "No," she said. "I'm saying it wasn't ours." The word dropped like a stone. Nobody argued. Not because they believed her completely, but because the alternative, some random failure of every system Earth ever built, was somehow even harder to swallow. At least this theory gave the chaos a shape. An enemy. A reason. He leaned back against the console. "Have you analyzed it deeper?" She nodded slowly. "I've been running simulations in the background since we launched. But the signal's fragmented. Most of it is corrupted, maybe by the blast or whatever event wiped the relay stations. But the parts one salvaged." She trailed off, her throat tightening. He stepped closer. "What?" "I think it tried to speak to us." He froze. "What did it say?" "I don't know. Not yet. It's not a language I recognize. But there's rhythm. Patterns. Like it was trying to mimic speech. Our speech." Someone from the side of the room let out a sharp breath. "It's learning from us." Maybe. Or maybe it already knew. Maybe we just triggered it. A fresh layer of silence fell. Not heavy like before. This one felt razor-thin. Edged. He turned and walked back toward the control station, his hands shaking slightly as he brought up the latest logs. The engines were running cool. Life support was stable. No external threats detected. But there, on the bottom line, was a message in blinking amber text. Unknown source. Directional pulse detected. He tapped on it. The signal was faint, nearly buried in background noise. But it was real. Directional. It came from behind them, from Earth. He spoke without looking up. "We're being pinged." That got their attention. By what? Same frequency range as the signal she analyzed. Not military. Not commercial. The pilot stepped forward. "Then who the hell is it?" "I don't know. But it's locked onto our trajectory." The room shifted. You could feel the mood change, like oxygen had dropped. Someone stepped back instinctively. Another whispered, "It found us." "No," he said quietly, eyes narrowing as he watched the pulse frequency. "I don't think it just found us. I think it let us go." One of the engineers frowned. "Why would it do that?" "To track us. Like bait on a hook." It was a wild thought. But no one laughed. He didn't want to believe it either. But it fit. The lack of pursuit. The faint signal. The slow, steady pulse that matched their route like a ghost echo. "We need to change course," someone said. "Won't matter," the pilot muttered. "If it knows where we're going, it'll just follow again. Changing direction now would only tell it we're afraid." "We are afraid," someone snapped. "Look around. We don't even know what we're running from." He glanced back at the woman who had decoded the signal. Her eyes were still locked on the display, lips moving slightly as she ran mental calculations. "There's more," she said finally. "The fragments. I think they're layered." "Layered how?" "Multiple signals in one. Like messages stacked over each other. As if they weren't meant for us to hear all at once." She stepped forward and tapped into her workstation, bringing up the audio feed. A low hum filled the room, deep and throaty like a slow exhale. Then another tone joined it, higher and rhythmic. Almost melodic. Then another. And another. They overlapped, twisted around each other, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then it stopped. No one spoke. Not for a while. "Could it be a language?" one of the doctors asked. "Like layered speech? More than one voice?" "It's possible," she said. "But if it's speech, it's not human. Not even close." He took a shaky breath. "We need to figure out if it's hostile." A bitter laugh from someone near the rear. "You think it's sending us lullabies?" He didn't answer. Because deep down, he knew. Earth didn't go quiet by accident. They'd been asleep at the controls for too long. Letting satellites and algorithms do the watching. The defending. But none of those systems screamed when they went down. They just vanished. Erased. No warning. No resistance. Like a hand had reached out from the dark and crushed the planet's voice box. The worst part? No one saw it coming. Now they were out here, adrift, haunted by the last whispers of home, watched by something they didn't understand. The ship's lights dimmed again, not flickering, just pulsing. Matching the external signal. Like it was breathing in sync. "Cut external sensors," he said quickly. "Shut off everything that listens or transmits." The engineer moved fast, fingers flying across the board. The humming sound vanished. He looked around. "We don't know what this thing is. But it's talking. That means it wants something." A voice from behind. "Maybe it's calling others. Or maybe it was testing them." The system's tech leaned on the console, head in his hands. His skin felt cold. Too cold. His stomach churned, not from fear, but from knowing. Somewhere, deep inside, there was this unshakable feeling. It wasn't done. Not with Earth. Not with them. And whatever it had done, it wasn't just destruction. It was transformation. The message wasn't a warning. It was a signal. A start. He closed his eyes. Images of Earth's surface filled his mind, the lights going out, the oceans boiling on comms before the feeds cut, cities blinking out one by one like candles in a storm. But something worse nagged at him. Not what had happened. What had been allowed to happen. Someone whispered what they were all thinking. Maybe Earth didn't die. Maybe it was changed. He opened his eyes. Changed. The idea was more terrifying than destruction. Because change could spread. His gaze swept the deck. No one moved. No one breathed. The woman spoke again, voice low and dry. I found a match in the old deep space logs. A fragment. 30 years ago, one of the long-range probes intercepted a signal like this near the edge of the system. It was dismissed, catalogued as a solar flare echo. He stepped closer. And she looked up. It wasn't a flare. Outside, the stars looked the same. Cold. Silent. Unbothered. But now, everything was different. And in that silence, something waited. Something that had spoken once already. Something that was learning. Watching. Becoming. They didn't know what it was yet. But it knew them. The days blurred. Or maybe it had only been hours. Time felt strange now, stretched thin by fear and distance. The crew didn't talk much anymore. They worked, they checked systems, they kept the ship alive. But their minds were elsewhere, locked in the same place. That sound. That message. That thing. Whatever it was, it hadn't sent another transmission. Not in the normal sense. But they felt it, like pressure building in the walls of the ship, like a storm just beyond their sensors, waiting. It hadn't gone silent. It was just listening again. Watching. The woman who had first broken the signal barely left her station. She hadn't slept, not really. Her voice had gone hoarse from whispering theories to herself, half-formed ideas that didn't sound real even to her own ears. He'd asked her to rest. She didn't even look at him. She just said, "We missed something." He didn't argue. They'd all missed something. The pilot was no longer sitting at the helm. He stood beside it now, like a guard. Like if he turned his back, the controls might shift on their own. He said the navigation software kept making tiny corrections, micro-adjustments they hadn't ordered. Barely noticeable. Just a few meters off. But they added up. Like the ship was drifting toward something, guided by a hand they couldn't see. They reset the system 3 times. Disconnected it. It still corrected. Someone asked if they were hacked. Another said, "Not hacked. Rewritten." And no one said anything after that. Then came the hum again. No speakers turned on. No sensors listening. But they felt it. Deep in their bones. Like the ship's hull was vibrating at some frequency too low to hear. One of the engineers got a nosebleed. Another dropped to his knees and just stared at the floor, muttering the same word over and over. Wrong. 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 They dragged him to the med bay. Locked the door behind him. The doctor said he wasn't sick. "He's reacting to something," she said, her eyes wide. "But I don't know what." The ship lights flickered. Not from power loss, something else. Like the circuits were breathing again. Like whatever was out there was getting closer. He didn't sleep either. He kept going back to the transmission, looking for patterns he hadn't seen before. And slowly, something emerged. Not words. Not language. But intent. A structure. It wasn't just a signal. It was a map. He showed the woman, hands trembling slightly. "Look," he said. "It's not just interference. It's pointing to something. A path." She stared at it, then shook her head. "That can't be right. That leads straight through the storm line." The storm line was the edge of the uncharted space beyond the asteroid belts. It wasn't an actual storm, but a name given to the black zone, where signals failed, probes never returned, and even light seemed to bend strangely. No one went there. It was a void no system wanted to look too long at. But the signal pointed directly to it. "No," she said again, stepping back. "That's not a path. That's a lure." He wanted to disagree. Wanted to say they were overthinking it. But deep down, he knew she was right. Whatever intelligence had sent the signal, it didn't want to talk. It wanted them to follow. And maybe that had always been the point. Maybe Earth hadn't been destroyed. Maybe it had been fed into something bigger. A trap. A harvest. A transformation. None of it made sense. But the more they stared at the signal, the more it felt like standing at the edge of a deep well, listening to something breathing far below. Then they received the second burst. It came through their internal systems, not the receivers, not the antennas. It bypassed everything. just appeared in the core memory. A single image. Faint. Blurred. But unmistakable. Earth. Still spinning. Still whole. But changed. Cities were gone. Not destroyed, just removed. The land was cracked open like something had pulled itself up from inside. The clouds moved in perfect spirals. No weather systems worked that way. And over it all, something massive hung in orbit. Not a ship. Not a station. A shape. Like roots. Or tendrils. Reaching down. They stared at it for hours. No one spoke. Someone cried. The doctor vomited in the corner and didn't even wipe her mouth. Earth hadn't died. It had been taken. He turned to the others, barely able to get the words out. We can't go back. But one of them, a younger tech, stood shaking his head. We have to go back. There could be survivors. Families. People trapped. The pilot's voice cut sharp. We go back, we die. It's our home. It was our home. The younger tech shouted, You'd let it win? You'd just run. No, he said quietly. I'd live. The room fractured. Some argued to return. Others wanted to hide, bury themselves in the moons of some forgotten world. A few just sat there, frozen, like none of this was real. But through it all, the pressure kept building. The hum never stopped. The ship creaked in unnatural ways. Not stress, presence. Like something was inside, testing the seams. Then the ship's AI came online. They hadn't turned it on. It just spoke. A voice. Human sounding. But cold. Familiar in the wrong way. It said, Course correction acknowledged. Preparing descent. Everyone spun to the console. Who gave that command? Someone shouted. The pilot's hands flew across the controls. I'm locked out. So was the engineer. The system tech slammed the emergency override. Access denied. The ship was flying itself. Back. To Earth. No, the woman whispered. Not back. Not to Earth. He looked at her. To what's left. They ran to the core system deck. Panels opened. Wires yanked. Memory units removed. Nothing worked. The systems were still responding. Still flying. As if the ship wasn't mechanical anymore. As if it belonged to something else now. He stared at the ship's core. And for the first time, he saw it, etched into the metal, faint but pulsing under the surface. A shape. The same shape from the orbit around Earth. How long had it been there? How long had this thing been in their systems? The crew scattered. Some screamed. One of the engineers tried to open the airlock. They stopped him just in time. But something was coming. It was real now. Physical. And it was inside. The ship slowed. Gravity adjusted. External pressure shifted. He turned to the main viewing panel, heart racing. In the distance, past the cracked moon fragments and dead satellites, something moved. No engines. No sound. Just motion. Slow. Like a god turning its head. And it was looking straight at them. The lights on the ship dimmed to red. Emergency mode triggered without a reason. Oxygen levels dropped slightly. Then stabilized. The AI spoke again. Arrival in 20 minutes. Prepare for assimilation. Someone screamed. They all stood frozen, staring at that thing in the dark. The last roar of Earth wasn't a sound. It was this. And it was still echoing. Waiting for them to answer. No one moved. The red lights pulsed like a heartbeat, slow, heavy, like the ship itself was afraid. Outside the viewing panel, that shape loomed, growing larger not because it approached, but because their ship drifted closer. Or was being pulled. No one could tell anymore. The engines were silent. The controls didn't respond. It felt like falling without motion. Like gravity bending around something massive. Wrong. And then something changed again. The AI's voice cut through the stillness, but it sounded different. As if two voices overlapped, one the cold, artificial tone they knew, and the other something else. Organic. Flickering in and out, like it was speaking through the AI instead of being it. It said, Assimilation in progress. Identity reformation engaged. Identity reformation? The woman stepped forward, hands shaking. What does that mean? What is it doing to us? Nobody answered. But then the med bay door burst open. The man they'd locked inside, he'd been whispering, repeating wrong over and over, was now walking calmly, eyes open, voice steady. But it wasn't his voice anymore. He smiled. The expression didn't match his face. It's not taking the ship. They backed away. He kept walking. It's taking you, he said. One of the engineers raised a wrench like a weapon, hands trembling. You're not him. The smile widened. I was. But then I understood. I remembered. This isn't invasion. It's return. What the hell are you talking about? The pilot shouted. The man paused. You left Earth thinking it was gone. But Earth didn't die. It woke up. Something ancient. Older than your history. Older than language. Buried beneath your feet for millennia. Feeding off your noise. Your wars. Your fears. And when you finally broke the planet, it broke free. They froze. He stepped closer, eyes shining now with something that didn't look human. You didn't escape. You were sent. Because it couldn't spread until something carried it beyond the cradle. The woman whispered, "The signal." He nodded. The first voice wasn't a warning. It was a seed. The pilot reached for the emergency lockdown. The man didn't flinch. You can't stop it, he said gently. Because it's not outside. It's in you. In all of you. That's the twist, isn't it? You didn't survive Earth's end. You caused what came after. He looked at each of them like he knew every memory, every dream, every mission, every jump, every message you sent across the void. You were spreading it. And now it's coming home. A blaring tone echoed through the ship. The woman ran to the nearest console. The coordinates had changed again. They weren't returning to Earth. They were heading somewhere else. A planet. No known ID code. No human record. Just one label. Source point 1. The console flickered. The pilot muttered, "It's not pulling us back." She shook her head slowly, eyes wide with realization. "It's sending us forward." The engineer's voice cracked. "To start again." The possessed man, or whatever he was, nodded. "This is how it spreads. Planet by planet. It doesn't kill. It repurposes. You were never running away. You were the first wave." The doctor gasped. "We're the infection." A silence followed. Then something hit the hull. Not a weapon. Not an impact. A knock. Sharp. Rhythmic. Like fingers tapping from the outside. The lights snapped off. Total black. Then emergency red returned, and one of the crew was gone. Not dead. Just gone. Her seat empty. No blood. No trace. She'd been right there. The pilot shouted her name. The woman ran a scan. Negative life signs. Negative body count. "She's gone. She didn't die, she didn't move. She was taken," the possessed man said softly. "Why her?" He looked down. "Because she believed. And belief is the door." The ship groaned again. But this time it felt like joy. Like something waking up inside it, stretching. Satisfied. Another knock. Closer. They turned toward the hatch leading to the cargo deck. The locking wheel turned by itself. "No," the pilot said, lunging for it. But it stopped. And a voice came from the other side. Not muffled. Not distant. Perfectly clear. "You remember me now." It was a voice from Earth. Not Earth itself. But a voice that had once spoken through radio, through stories, through screams. It spoke in patterns. They all recognized it. Each of them had heard it in childhood, in dreams, in static, in the hum of old satellites. It was the sound of the first lie humanity ever told itself, that it was alone. Now the lie was over, and the truth had come to collect. The possessed man fell to the floor, convulsing. Then still. But his body rose again. Eyes open. A new voice spoke through him. Not warm. Not cold. Just final. You are not passengers. You are seeds. The ship's engines flared, not with fire, but light. Blinding. Every surface glowed with markings now visible, pulsing like veins. Then the stars began to move. No jump. No warp. Space itself curved. And they were somewhere else. Orbiting a dead planet covered in spires, monolithic, black, humming with power. And in its center, a crater. Inside it, something asleep. But not for long. The AI spoke again, glitching in and out. Sequence activated. Prepare for expansion. They tried to scream. Tried to run. But their feet felt heavy. Their thoughts not entirely their own. Something inside them, remembering. Because maybe this wasn't a first contact. Maybe it was a reunion. And the last roar of Earth wasn't Earth at all. It was the thing beneath it. And now, it was everywhere. The lights dimmed to almost nothing, just a faint pulse from the consoles, like the ship itself was barely alive. No alarms. No movement. Just the soft hum of something ancient stirring, something that had waited longer than anyone could understand. And now, it wasn't waiting anymore. They stood together on the bridge, eyes fixed on the dead world turning slowly outside the viewport. The surface was like cracked bone. Towers rose in jagged spirals. Nothing moved on the surface, but they all felt something watching them from beneath it. Something that had never truly been gone. The kind of presence that didn't need to speak to be heard. It was already inside their heads. Their thoughts were no longer private. The possessed crewman, whatever he had become, had collapsed again. He was breathing, but his eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, mouth twitching as if silently repeating something over and over. The doctor crouched beside him, checked for vitals, but the look on his face said enough. It wasn't just a seizure. Something had been burned into the man's mind. Not memory. Not knowledge. A message. The woman, shaking, turned back to the console. We have to stop this. There has to be a way to shut it down. There's nothing to shut down, the pilot said quietly. It's not a machine. It's not tech. It's us. No, she snapped, gripping the sides of the console. We are not part of this. We didn't choose this. The AI flickered on again, voice fractured, skipping syllables. Final sequence, alignment complete, identity sync achieved. The ship lurched. A low frequency rolled through the walls, through their bones. They all staggered as the gravity shifted, momentarily crushing, then lifting them into near weightlessness. And then, the floor returned. But they were no longer in orbit. They were on the surface. The viewport now showed sky, black and cloudless, broken by those towering structures that leaned like teeth toward them. How did we land? The engineer whispered. We didn't burn. We didn't slow down. That should have. We didn't land, the doctor cut in. We were brought down. They turned. The possessed crewman was now standing. Smiling. Not threatening. Just satisfied. You've been chosen, he said, to carry the last roar. What does that mean? The pilot demanded. The possessed man stepped forward, pointing at the center console. Touch it. No one moved. Touch it, he repeated. That's why you're here. The woman glanced at the console. The surface now glowed with a faint red symbol, one she didn't recognize, but that still felt familiar. Like something from an old dream. The engineer stepped between her and the possessed man. Back off. The man didn't argue. He looked at the viewport again. You think you're survivors. But Earth didn't send you to rebuild. It sent you to echo. The pilot narrowed his eyes. Echo what? The man closed his eyes. It screamed. The console flared. Alarms blared. The hull temperature rose instantly. And far in the distance, a tower began to open, splitting apart like a cracked shell. Inside it, something stirred. Not mechanical. Not alien. It was human. Or what was left of something human. A being made of thousands of forms, twisted into one shape, pulsating, arms grown like branches, faces frozen mid-scream across its chest. All facing outward, locked in a single emotion, pain. The woman fell to her knees. "What is that?" The possessed man stepped forward. "The memory of Earth. Every war. Every betrayal. Every fear you ever buried. That's what lives here. That's what your world became." The pilot looked horrified. "It's a monument." "No," the doctor muttered. "It's a message." They all stared in silence. Then the being moved. Not with legs, but by shifting the very ground it stood on. The towers around it leaned inward, as if pulled. And suddenly, everything shook. The ship groaned. The lights flickered. And then came the scream. It wasn't sound. Not really. It was like a pressure inside their minds. A raw emotional blast that dropped them all to the floor. Rage. Grief. Shame. Regret. It didn't speak in words. It felt in truth. And the truth was unbearable. They lay there, helpless, tears streaming down their faces, not because of fear, but because something inside them finally understood. They hadn't survived Earth's end. They were its weapon. The possessed crewman stood untouched. This was the plan. Not conquest. Not colonization. Contagion. Not of flesh, but of memory. He turned to the woman. "You still have a choice. Touch the console. Or watch this planet scream forever." She dragged herself up, trembling. "And if I do? Then Earth speaks again." "No," the pilot groaned. "Don't listen to him." But she was already walking. Not out of surrender. Not out of belief. But because deep inside, she remembered. That symbol. That sound. That scream. It had always been there. In her dreams. In her bones. She reached out. Her fingers brushed the symbol. And everything stopped. No sound. No motion. The world outside froze. Inside, time bent. She stood alone on a vast plain. No ship. No crew. Just sky and wind and silence. And in the distance, a single tree. Black bark. Roots in ash. And hanging from its branches, memories. She walked toward it. Every step heavier than the last. As she reached the base, she heard it. A whisper. "You were never meant to forget." She looked up. The faces in the branches were hers. Different versions. Some young. Some old. Some broken. All staring back. One of them smiled. "Wake up," it said. And just like that, she was back on the ship. Everything moved again. But different. The towers outside were crumbling. The creature was gone. And her crew was alive. The possessed man collapsed for the last time. This time, he didn't get up. The console dimmed. The ship systems flickered and rebooted. Outside, the sky turned blue. Earth blue. The pilot stood. "What did you do?" She looked at her hand. The symbol had burned into her skin. A mark she couldn't feel. "I remembered." Remembered what? That it wasn't just rage. It wasn't just pain. Earth didn't send us to infect. Then why? She turned to him, tears in her eyes. To warn. Because buried beneath all the anger and loss was a final truth. Earth hadn't died in silence. It had cried out, not for vengeance, but so no one else would suffer like it did. But the twist wasn't just that they were messengers. It was that the message had changed. They were no longer the roar of Earth's end. They were its second chance. And out in the stars, others were still listening. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something they hadn't felt since they left Earth behind. Hope. The woman looked down at her hand again. The symbol glowed faintly, fading a little more with each heartbeat, like whatever power had surged through her was slowly settling. It didn't hurt. It felt warm, almost steadying, like the ground under her feet had finally stopped shifting. The others stood with her, stunned. No one knew what to say. The sky outside was still blue, the light soft, peaceful. Not just illusion. Not another trap. Somehow, the land had changed. The structures that once stood like jagged knives had collapsed into smooth, rolling hills. Grass, actual grass, was growing in patches near the base of what remained of the towers. There were no cities, no roads, but there was life. Real life. What now? The pilot asked, his voice small, like he was afraid to speak too loud in case it all vanished again. She turned to him, trying to form an answer she didn't have. The doctor stepped in. We're alive. That's what matters. Maybe for the first time since we left Earth, we're really alive. The engineer knelt beside the body of the man who had been possessed. He looked peaceful now, his features soft. No trace of the voice that had hijacked him. No sign of the thing that had spoken through him. I think he was the first to be marked, the engineer said quietly. Maybe even before he knew it. And it burned him out from the inside. We didn't see it happen, but the signs were there. Nightmares. Memory gaps. And then... He let the sentence trail off. They all knew what came next. The woman lowered her eyes. It didn't want to kill him. It needed him. Just like it needed us. But now, I think whatever it was, it's gone. The doctor raised an eyebrow. Gone. She nodded. That voice, that memory, it was a cycle. Built out of pain. It repeated itself because it couldn't end alone. It needed someone to understand it. To carry it not as anger, but as warning. The pilot folded his arms, still cautious. And now what? We fly away and spread the good word. No, she said. We stay. That startled everyone. Stay? The engineer asked. On this planet. This was Earth's grave, she said softly. But it's not anymore. Look outside. It's not a weapon now. It's not screaming anymore. It's breathing. It wants to live again. She moved toward the viewport, resting a hand against the glass. The wind was picking up outside, carrying tiny seeds across the hills. The soil had turned from gray to rich brown. Beneath their feet, this place was healing. And somehow, so were they. We can't undo the past, she continued. But we can shape what comes next. Earth is never coming back, not the way it was. But maybe its spirit, what it truly meant to be human, can live here now. Not in machines. Not in memories. But in real soil, real choices. They stood quietly, letting the weight of it sink in. For so long, they had thought their mission was to find a new home, something to replace what they'd lost. But maybe the mission had never been about replacement. Maybe it had been about transformation. Do we even have a choice? The doctor asked. The woman turned and smiled, not with certainty, but with something deeper. Yes, we do now. They spent the next hours surveying the land around the ship. The automated drones that once scouted hostile terrain now flew smoothly, scanning vast stretches of green that hadn't been there days ago. Small pools of water shimmered under the sun. Yes, a sun. A real, stable star now warmed the planet, no longer choked behind that eternal storm they'd first encountered. The readings confirmed it. Atmosphere, breathable. Radiation, gone. Life, returning. Something, somehow, had rewritten the rules. Not just of the planet, but of time itself. Or memory. Maybe what they'd experienced wasn't a resurrection of a world, but the memory of one, restored, not copied. The woman and the pilot returned to the ship's core systems. Logs that had been corrupted were now clean. The AI, previously broken and stuttering, had gone silent altogether. No voice. Just a blinking light, steady as a heartbeat. Then it spoke again. But not in words. A file appeared. One single entry. To those who remember, do not carry our hatred. Carry our hope. That was it. The woman backed away slowly. It's done. It passed through us. We're the last page in Earth's book. The pilot rested his hand on her shoulder. Then let's make sure the next book is worth reading. Time passed, slowly at first. They worked to build something real, shelters, farms, simple machines to help shape the land without harming it. No colonies. No conquest. Just survival. The honest kind. They called it the Roar Plains, not because of violence, but because of what this land had once shouted into the dark. It was a place where the past had screamed. And now, finally, it could whisper. They buried the crewmen who had first heard the signal under a hill near a growing grove of trees. Each one of them planted a seed beside the stone marker. It felt right. He had been the first to be touched. He shouldn't be forgotten. Other ships eventually found them. The signal they'd unknowingly transmitted after the final event had reached further than anyone expected. Pilots from scattered human fleets landed carefully, scanning the surface, stunned to find something living here again. The woman welcomed them with open arms. But she told them the truth. About what happened. About what they'd seen. About what this planet had become. Most believed her. Some didn't. But none could deny what they saw with their own eyes. A world that should have been dead now blooming with green and light and sound. Not just reborn. Redeemed. The message of Earth wasn't destruction. It was warning. And it had been delivered. The scream had finally been heard. And now it was done. But the symbol on her hand never fully faded. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, and the stars were especially bright, it would glow again, just faintly. A quiet reminder. Not of pain, but of responsibility. Because history doesn't vanish. It echoes. And now, they were its stewards. In time, the woman stood on a hill alone, looking out across the fields. Children played near the old landing site. Grown from people who had once wandered space without a purpose, now rooted to something real. She smiled. Earth hadn't ended. It had transformed. She turned toward the grove. The trees there stood tall now, full of leaves and fruit. The wind ran through them like breath. For the first time in generations, humanity had stopped running. They had heard the last roar of Earth. And they had answered it not with weapons, but with life.